safety. My name is Michelle Lieberman. I am the Technical Assistance Manager with the Safe Routes to School National Partnership, and I'll be serving as your webinar moderator today, and happy to have you join us. First, a little bit about the National Partnership if you're not familiar with us. We're a nonprofit organization working to advance safe walking and bicycling to and from schools to improve the health and well-being of kids of all races, income levels, and abilities, and to foster the creation of healthy communities for everyone. We do this in a number of ways. We're working to improve the quality of life for kids, families, and communities. We advance policy change at the federal, state, regional, and local levels. We're looking to catalyze support for safe, healthy, and active communities, and sharing our deep expertise through things like today's webinar. Before we start the presentations, I want to orient you to the GoToWebinar windows. To the left is the webinar viewer through which you'll see the presentation, and on the right is the webinar control panel where you can raise your hand, ask questions, and select an audio mode. Please note that the control panel will collapse automatically if it's not in use. To keep it open, you can click on the View menu and uncheck Auto Hide. There's two options for listening to us today, a telephone or your computer, mic, and speakers. If you have sound problems with one selection, try the other. And if you're still having challenges with it, we'll do our best to field any issues. Just send us a chat message. All of the attendees are muted today, but even though you're muted, we want to hear from your questions and input. You can use the questions box to ask the speakers any questions, and at the end of the webinar, we'll have time and we'll hopefully get through as many of those as possible. Also want to let you know that a recording of today's webinar will be available on our website in about a day or two. You'll find these online by going to saferoutespartnership.org, clicking on the resources menu in the top bar, and then the webinars on the left side. And we'll help you share the webinars with others that are interested. And now for our speakers, we have an excellent group of people here with us today. We're going to start with Leah Sham. She is the founder and director of the Vision Zero Network, a national campaign supporting cities working towards Vision Zero, zero traffic fatalities and severe injuries. The network helps communities develop and share best practices for safe mobility for all road users. Leah will provide some background on Vision Zero and why those working in Vision Zero should work with Safe Routes to School. After Leah, we'll hear from Margot Pedroso. Margot serves as the Deputy Director for the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. In this role, she manages government relations, policy research and analysis to advance the Safe Routes to School national movement. She oversees our regional and state policy teams and assists the Director with finance, operations, and strategic planning. Margot is going to talk about some background on Safe Routes to School and what those working in the Safe Routes to School world can gain from those working in Vision Zero. And then last, we'll hear from Jonathan Rogers. Jonathan is a policy analyst in the Washington, D.C. District Department of Transportation. Within the Policy and Legislative Affairs Division, Jonathan leads multi-agency coordination for Vision Zero and formulates policies and regulatory proposals with a particular emphasis on safe, multimodal, comprehensive approach. Jonathan will talk about how Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School are working in Washington, D.C., and how they are working together. And as I said before, we'll have questions and answers at the end after all the speakers. So with that, I will hand it over to Leah.
Great, thanks Molly, and thanks to the whole team at the Safe Routes to School National Partnership. Just bringing up my slides now. Is that working okay? I think so. Great, so my name is Leah Sham and I'm with the Vision Zero Network. Thanks so much for the introduction. And I'm going to cover a little bit about what Vision Zero is, how it differs from the traditional approach to traffic safety, and then really emphasize ways that we see great opportunity for greater partnership between Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School programs. We do see a lot of alignment already, but we think there's even more potential. I'll share a little bit about who we are. First, we are a nonprofit group. We've been around just about 2 years, so relatively new. And our main work is working with cities at this point in helping them advance Vision Zero. And our biggest piece is really networking together communities so they can learn from each other. So folks like Jonathan in Washington, D.C. can learn from Seattle, who can learn from Austin, who can learn from Fort Lauderdale, and around the country. So I'm going to talk a little bit about really what we're learning and what we're seeing out there. I'm going to start with little bit of the scope of the problem. I unfortunately probably don't need to tell folks this, but we do have a major public health crisis in this country of 40,000 people dying a year in what we consider preventable traffic deaths. And I really like this quote from the National Safety Council that our complacency is killing us. And really what we're trying to do with Vision Zero is help change that. And a little bit of a comparison here to other nations. You'll see that the US unfortunately leads in this bad statistics of high traffic death rate. We're actually higher than this now. It's about 11 traffic deaths per 100,000 people in the US, compared to places like Sweden, you see at the bottom there, which is under 3 traffic deaths per 100,000 people. So this is rate, obviously. And I'm highlighting Sweden in particular because that's the country where Vision Zero started 20 years ago. So it's a relatively new concept or young concept. Vision Zero was started in Sweden 20 years ago. And in that time, they have cut their traffic deaths in half. And I want to emphasize in that time, their population and their number of trips have increased. So by no means is Vision Zero limiting mobility. In fact, obviously we're aiming for mobility, but it really is about the goal of safe mobility. And I'll just pause here. I want to share this photo and give credit to New York City. This is an image from New York City about 4 years ago. These are community members organizing for Vision Zero there. And I'll just pause and emphasize, make sure folks know the goal of Vision Zero is pretty straightforward. It's the goal of 0 traffic deaths or severe injuries among all road users. But how we get there, it's really about how we get there. It's really about the principles that make Vision Zero different than the traditional approach to traffic safety. But I want to emphasize on this slide that we really are seeing, I'd say, a sea change in community engagement around the issue of safe mobility. And I think this is something that the Safe Routes to School community can really help us continue with, and also is a big part of. Just as you all have in the Safe Routes community really helped bring more attention to the importance and the priority of safe passage for kids and families to school and everywhere they go. We're really now trying to build on that and talk about that for all road users, obviously. And let me share a little bit more about New York City here, kind of jump to the chase that when New York City started Vision Zero, they were the first in the US. That was about 3.5 years ago. So not that long ago. But in that time, they've had tremendous success. In just 3.5 years, they've seen a 23% reduction in traffic deaths across the board. And some of the main ways they've done that is lowering speed limits. It used to be 35, and now it's a 25-mile-per-hour speed limit. They've done major road redesigns. You can see a before and after picture here with the after on the right. And they have also started using automated speed enforcement, which we'll talk a little bit more about in this presentation. But I really want to point to New York's success and Sweden's success as really kind of our beacons of hope and the optimism that we have. This map is showing where all of the Vision Zero communities are in the US that we know of. There may be more that we've not heard of in the last few days, but this is showing 30 communities who have committed to the goal of Vision Zero in just the last 3.5 years. So you can see quite a variety around the country. And now I'm really going to delve into a little bit about the difference. What are the key differences between the traditional approach and what we're seeing with Vision Zero today? And I'll move quickly through these. First, we've kind of approached traffic safety and frankly the deaths and injuries on our road as some unfortunate but inevitable side effect of modern society. Even if we don't consciously think that, frankly, the way media covers it, the way policymakers deal with it has often been not one from a place of real power and change. So Vision Zero is really helping to set the tone and expectation that these traffic deaths are preventable. Next, we've really focused more in the past on perfecting human behavior, and we've put in a lot of attention on individual responsibility. How do we help people understand their responsibilities and make them do the right thing? While that is certainly still important, and we want to educate people and make sure that they understand their responsibilities, etc., we also, through Vision Zero, want to understand that humans will fail. You see that second item on the right, that unfortunately, people are fallible, they will make mistakes, there will be, issues that happen, and we need to design our systems in ways that make sure that folks are not actually dying or being severely injured there. So this is really about preventing fatal and severe crashes and really using a systems approach to this. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about that now. So first, acknowledging that traffic losses are preventable. And if there's one big takeaway I could ask everybody to commit to on this call today, think about the language you're using. It seems like a small thing, but it's pretty important in thinking about how we think about our ability to change things. An accident, it sounds like, gosh, that could happen to anybody and there's no control over it. When in fact, there's a lot we can control in our roadway environment, in our policies, in our systems, et cetera, to make sure that these crashes are not severe or fatal. So these are not just accidents. We actually do have control. So part of that is taking a systems approach. And I think this is very much in the world of public health a given. This spectrum of prevention is an approach that the public health community uses a lot. And I think this is something I've seen you all use in the Safe Routes communities as well. While we certainly want to be working at these, say, the lower levels of community education and strengthening individual knowledge, absolutely. We want to be teaching kids, how to walk and bike safely. We want to be teaching adults how to drive safely. Of course we do. We need to keep doing that. We have not put enough attention, we would say, traditionally, in these upper areas, which is really about influencing policy and legislation and organizational practices. And a key example of that, of course, is the roadway environment. How are we designing, or how are our system designers setting up the roadways, the sidewalks, the bikeways, to be complete streets, to be safe and inviting for everyone, whether an 8-year-old or an 80-year-old. So Vision Zero really focuses on these upper levels, and when I say upper, it's really kind of an upstream approach, because when we influence policy, legislation, roadway systems, the environment, the physical environment, that then of course has a trickle-down effect on how we as individuals behave. I'm going to emphasize that data-driven, or Vision Zero is a very data-driven approach. And I think this is a great opportunity as well for communities working on Safe Routes to School programs. I'm going to give a few examples here. This is Boston. It's a lot of information here, but Boston is a Vision Zero community. You'll see some of the information they're highlighting here is, where particularly are people walking being killed, people biking, people driving, what kinds of roads, arterials, etc. This is an opportunity where we can really emphasize certain communities, certain neighborhoods, certain communities particularly that are disproportionately affected by traffic crashes. Of course, that is children, that is youth. We know that kids are more vulnerable physically. So really thinking about, could communities then layer on top of their maps, their high injury crash maps, where the schools are located, where the transit centers are located, where the senior centers are located, and really then bring greater emphasis to those communities where we might have more vulnerable populations. Here's another example of Denver, and I'll highlight here that Denver is not unlike other cities. Most cities we're working with have this scenario where a high proportion of severe injuries and deaths are happening on a small number of streets. So here you see 50% of Denver's fatalities are happening on just 5% of the streets. That is really powerful data. That really helps decision makers in Denver decide where to put their scarce resources. And again, I think this is an opportunity for Safe Routes communities to really go deep with your data to understand what's happening, not just directly right around the school, of course you look at that, but what are the most busy or important walking routes and biking routes to the school, and then really lift up that data and help make sure that your community's finite resources go to those areas. And I'm going to talk a little bit here about what the data is also showing us, and I want to credit the Safe Routes to School National Partnership with this helpful data. But a few statistics, these are national statistics, showing that low-income folks in America are twice as likely to be killed while walking. African American and Latino people in the US are twice as likely to be killed while walking. And a statistic showing that high-income communities are much more likely to have sidewalks. This is also true of bikeways. The opposite is true of fast streets, big arterials, and touchdowns with freeways. And by that I mean low-income communities often bear the highest brunt, the disproportionate brunt of big freeway touchdowns, high-speed one-way roads, things that we know are more dangerous. So again, this data showing us this, and you can get into the micro level, not only in your city, but in your neighborhood, in your school zone. You can really use this data to be powerful. and show your decision makers, those who make the decisions about money, frankly, and make decisions about where design and engineering staff are going to put their time, where education campaigns are going to be focused. You can really use that data to help to show where the problems are most severe and where you need the help the most. And again, you can layer that on school zones or areas where you have a lot of kids walking or wanting to walk or bike. And quickly, I'm going to talk about the E's. Folks probably know the E's. If you don't, they are kind of traditional way of looking at traffic safety. Things like engineering, education, enforcement, evaluation. We're certainly adding equity and engagement there more and more, and we need to be doing that. In Vision Zero, we really emphasize that not all the E's are created equal. They're all very important, certainly, but it really comes down to that basics, kind of the foundation of the built environment and the speeds we set and the policies we set. So again, back to that kind of public health approach, that upstream approach of what has the greatest impact. So this little graph is showing kind of a simplified way that we're really looking at this. If everyone is looking towards safe travel for all, we all share that goal of zero traffic deaths, we really think about these as the key areas to focus. Safe streets, so how do you design or redesign your streets to be as safe as you want? So that means building out complete streets, of course, for people walking and biking. It means speeds, safe speeds, we'll talk about that. Safe vehicles, obviously leveraging the technological advances in the world today to make sure that vehicles are as safe as they can be. And then safe people, of course, emphasizing the education and the role of enforcement in a thoughtful, equitable way, but really making sure that people know, what behaviors are safe and emphasizing that. And here I want to get back to the idea that not all E's are created equal. This is an image of kids walking in my hometown of Jacksonville, Florida. And this is a suburban community. And there is a school right here about 2 blocks away from this picture. And kids are walking to school, which is great. But these kids don't have sidewalks to walk on. There's no sidewalk on this side. You can't see, but there's no sidewalk on the other side either. So this is a case where it really comes down to the road design. If we don't build a sidewalk for these kids to walk on, they don't have a choice, right? We cannot educate them into doing the right thing. We cannot enforce them into doing the right thing. Similarly, as a woman crossing, if you can't see, with a stroller, with a baby in it, there's no crosswalk for a good half mile. And there's a lot of facilities here, a lot of businesses. So if we know people want to cross, let's design safely. Let's design properly so that she has a safe place to cross with her child. Similarly, you see a gentleman here in a motorized wheelchair. Again, long, long way to cross. So he's doing what most people are going to do, cross right in the middle there. So again, not a situation where we can educate or enforce our way out of this, but we really need to come back to basics with roadway design. And again, a pretty clear shot here of a need for dedicated bikeways. What we're seeing is really, I think, a sea change again in people demanding change and demanding safety. And a big piece of this has been around speed management. So I'm quickly going to talk about the ways that we really are trying to emphasize that if you're serious about safety, if you truly want to save lives and cut down, obviously, on severe injuries, the most important thing you can do is manage speed. And I think this graph says it all. At 20 miles per hour, if someone's hit while walking, an average person, now again, this is an average sized person, not necessarily a child or maybe a more frail senior, but kind of average age adult, they have a 9 out of 10 chance to survive at 20 miles per hour. Yet at 40 miles per hour, their odds are exact opposite. They have a 1 out of 10 chance to survive. And I think this tells a big story that, if we're encouraging, and we are, right, in the Safe Routes movement and our movement, we're encouraging people to walk and bike more. We're encouraging them to be healthy, to be out and be mobile and be active for so many health reasons. And if we're doing that, we need to be setting our speed limits and enforcing our speed limits and designing our roads for speeds we want. That's why we're pushing cities to be moving to 20, 25 miles per hour in a city, not to be condoning 30 or 40 miles per hour. And again, we're doing that in these main ways. We're encouraging cities to do this through street design, speed limits, and then automated speed enforcement, which can sometimes be a touchy thing, or a politically challenging, I should say, thing, but is absolutely proven in the cities where it's been done well to encourage safe behavior and encourage safe speeds. I know Washington, D.C. has had great success on this. And a lot of communities are really leading with their speed management efforts, and particularly with automated speed enforcement in their school zones. Frankly, there's a lot more. You all probably know there's a lot more, I'd say, public support or awareness of safety for children around school zones. So it's an area where you can often get more political and public buy-in for new measures like automated speed enforcement to help ensure safety. And then final point around leadership, please check out our website for more information about this, but really emphasizing that if we're looking at a local level, we really want to make sure that we have the top support from the mayor, and then from your key departments, transportation department, public health department, police, of course, and mayor's office, I said. Also the school zone, we want to make sure that the school district's involved and that we have principals on board and school leaders and parents. So there's a huge opportunity for the leadership of the Safe Routes movement to be engaged in Vision Zero and I think really advance this work more quickly. And again, this is on our website, but really emphasizing Vision Zero is not about a whole new toolbox. It's not about a bunch of new technical solutions. I think we know most of what needs to be done out there, and we're learning more and more every day, of course, but it's really about the how we do it. It's about the strategy. So a lot of this is about collaboration and data-driven approach and emphasizing equity. And again, all pieces that you all do such a good job in the Safe Routes movement in doing. And again, really emphasizing that not all communities are at equal risk. Again, we know youth and seniors, people with disabilities, people walking and biking, people of low income and then communities of color have greater risk out on the streets. So really being able to make sure those communities do get the resources and attention they deserve. And I'll wind down here because of course it all is about people. It really is about our families, our neighbors, our friends, ourselves. How do we help keep folks safe? And I will leave with my contact information here and hand it back over to you, Molly.
Great, thanks everyone. This is Margot Pedroso, and I'm going to talk to you a little bit about Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero. So first, for those of us that are joining us that are not Safe Routes experts, I wanted to just take 2 slides to tell you a little bit about what Safe Routes to School is. It's an initiative to make it safer for kids and families to walk and bike to and from school. And we emphasize that it's a comprehensive approach. It's not just putting down sidewalks. We use an approach that we call the 6 E's to capture the breadth of the program. So evaluation, taking parent surveys, doing student tallies to help you understand the mode shift, changes in attitudes, and also places where you might need to do more work where there are still concerns. Engineering, this is the sidewalks, the crosswalks, the signage, the traffic calming, all the things you need to create safe places for kids to walk and bike. Through education, you can teach kids about safe walking and biking behaviors. This can be done in PE classes. It can be done through special events like bike rodeos or safety education courses. Then we've got enforcement. This is about training and equipping crossing guards and working with law enforcement thoughtfully to ensure that drivers are driving safely around schools. Then we've got encouragement. This is about getting kids wanting to walk and bike more and making sure parents are comfortable with them doing so. So approaches here are things like walking school buses, walking Wednesdays, frequent miler programs. And then finally, last but definitely not least, is equity, making sure that the kids who need Safe Routes to School most have access. So this may be prioritizing improvements in high-need areas, translating materials into other languages, those types of things. And Safe Routes to School has been around for more than 10 years now, all across the country, and we've been fortunate that our partners in the health world have really been interested in studying Safe Routes to School. So there's a lot of studies on individual programs that clearly show that kids who walk and bike to school get more physical activity, they are fitter, and they have lower BMIs. And then we've also had a couple of big multi-state studies that have come out that have looked at dozens of schools across several states, and they clearly show that Safe Routes to School does get kids walking. So 35 to 45% increases in walking and biking, with higher increases when the programming is consistent and long-term. And in terms of safety, what we're here to talk about today, we've also had 2 studies in the past 2 years that have looked at pedestrian injuries. And what they found is that Safe Routes to School initiatives reduce pedestrian injuries near schools by 45 to 75%. And the great news for Vision Zero in particular is it's not just kids that are safer, but everyone who's walking and biking in those areas near schools. And to really piggyback off what Leah said, we do have a lot of work to do, however, to make sure the programming and improvements get to those who need it most. about 30% of Americans don't drive due to age, poverty, or disability. And that means that those folks often have no choice but to walk or bike in unsafe circumstances. We know that low-income kids are twice as likely to walk to school, but unfortunately they're also twice as likely to be hit by a car while walking or biking. And as Leah highlighted, that's because there's often less investment in these communities, lack of sidewalks, lack of traffic calming, street lighting, and that doesn't take into account other issues that low-income communities may face, such as crime, violence, or unfair policing targeting minorities walking and biking. So with that context, the thing that I'm really excited about is that the Safe Routes to School movement has really evolved over the years and come to understand its place within the larger healthy communities frame. We're not just putting sidewalks around schools and kind of crossing that off the list and moving on. This is about creating opportunities for kids and families to be physically active and healthy in their homes, at school, and in their neighborhoods. So many advocates across the country are working on larger policy issues like safe access to healthy foods, complete streets policies, shared use agreements, and more along these lines. And we often find that Safe Routes to School initiatives are a launching place. They're a place where people feel comfortable getting involved because it's about kids and safety, and then they start to look at the bigger picture and how they can do more. So one of those that we really see an area for growth is Vision Zero. So I'm going to make my plea to anyone on this phone who's a Safe Routes advocate about why you should engage in Vision Zero, and I'm going to make a similar plea to anyone on this phone who's involved in Vision Zero as to why you should reach out to Safe Routes advocates. For Safe Routes advocates, Vision Zero, as you heard from Leah, is really a way to tap into high-level political leadership. Mayors and city councils are the ones leading the charge on Vision Zero, and they're really setting the expectation that the city or the community will do things differently and focus on safety. That often leads to new funding and investments in safety improvements, and those are all things that will obviously benefit Safe Routes to School. And Leah mentioned speed. This is an example of a larger policy issue that's often extremely difficult to tackle around an individual school for a Safe Routes advocate. And speed limits and speeding are critical factors in safety for kids. And so Vision Zero can give you an opportunity to tie into that effort and reduce speeds across the board rather than having to fight that battle street by street. And that data-driven approach can also help you think about Safe Routes to School broader than individual schools. It can help you identify where the improvements are most needed and prioritize, which schools that you're working with for Safe Routes to School. Rather than kind of doing it one community at a time or one school at a time. In terms of how to get involved, there's not kind of a one-size-fits-all, but I think the first thing is, whether or not Vision Zero is happening in your community already. Leah posted a map in her slide. If you guys are not on that list, you're going to need to work with fellow advocates to get interest in Vision Zero. So I encourage you to find friends, reach out to walking and biking advocates, safety organizations, disability rights groups, and see if you can work together to coordinate a campaign to push for Vision Zero. And you'll have to meet with policymakers, make the case for why a comprehensive safety effort is needed to protect kids and families, and tap into data to make your case. If you're a city that's already moving on Vision Zero, either a commitment's already been made, or a plan is in development, or a plan has already been done, the hard part is done in that there's already been a commitment made to Vision Zero. What you need to do is make sure that Safe Routes to School is a part of it. There's usually a lead for the city or the community in charge of Vision Zero. Reach out to that person and talk to them. Have a meeting to talk about what you're doing for Safe Routes to School and how you can partner. There may be a task force or a stakeholder advisory group for Vision Zero, and volunteer to join that or go to meetings. This kind of stuff may be happening at your city's traffic safety or bicycle and pedestrian committees. Again, figure out where you need to show up to have the conversations with the right people. And if you're still in the formulation process, you can also try to get parents and students to turn out at Vision Zero hearings and events. That's a great place for leaders to hear from kids and families that safety on the way to and from school is important and should be included in Vision Zero. And I know this sounds like a lot of work, and Safe Routes advocates already have a lot on their plate, but the potential payoff for getting Safe Routes to School integrated into Vision Zero can lead to more funding, greater programming, and more supportive policies across your entire city that will make it safer for kids and families to walk and bike, which then will get more kids doing so. And I have a few examples that I wanted to share. You're going to hear about some really outstanding examples from Jonathan in a minute, so I'm going to leave DC out of these examples. So first is, as Leah mentioned, make sure that all of those maps and data that Vision Zero folks are producing, mapping out injuries and fatalities, that are often then used to guide where infrastructure improvements and investments are made, make sure that things important to Safe Routes to School are on there. Make sure that schools are mapped out. What is the catchment area where kids are walking from, or key walking routes? Are there other destinations kids are going to, nearby parks or libraries or places like that? Make sure that those things are included. An example of this is that in LA, as part of Vision Zero, for every single school in the LA Unified School District, which is a lot of schools, they mapped collision rates, the number of kids living within walking and biking distance of schools, as well as poverty levels. And the map that resulted from that helped them identify 50 schools that are their first cohort for Safe Routes to School improvements. And again, this is Safe Routes to School work, but it's being done within the Vision Zero frame. Another opportunity is to increase city investments or staffing for Safe Routes to School. You know, there's often money that's being either identified, new money, or a reprioritization of existing money to invest into Vision Zero improvements, and trying to make sure that some of that goes to Safe Routes to School. An example here is that Montgomery County, Maryland, actually pays for their Safe Routes to School coordinator out of county funds, meaning that they're not subject to kind of whether or not they get a grant. It's a permanent position. And it's then tied into their burgeoning Vision Zero efforts. You know, the Safe Routes to School coordinator is part of the same agency that runs all of their transportation in Vision Zero, so it's easy for them to coordinate. Another idea is to offer comprehensive bicycle and pedestrian safety education to all kids rather than just at schools where Safe Routes to School is taking place. You'll hear about a good example from Jonathan. An interesting take on it in Los Angeles, they're asking all driver's education providers in the city to include mobility education so that new drivers learn how to drive, but they also learn how to drive safely around people walking and biking. Another key component is reducing speeding and speed limits. I've talked about that a lot, so has Leah. An example here is that New York City installed speed cameras around schools throughout the boroughs, and that's led to a 13% decrease in traffic-related injuries because drivers are driving more slowly. Another idea here is to engage community groups to reach out to residents about safety. Safe Routes to School does a great job of kind of community engagement, parent outreach, and this is something that Vision Zero can actually set aside money to do. So in Portland, for example, the city created a grant program as part of Vision Zero where they award funds to community-based organizations to do things like street design visioning, outreach, and education, focusing on communities of concern. So I've gone over a lot today, and it's only kind of the tip of the iceberg. So I'd really encourage you, if you want more information, to take a look at our report that came out a few months ago called Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School, Partners in Safety. It's available at saferoutespartnership.org. It goes over in a little bit more detail, you know, why you should get involved in Vision Zero, how to do it, and some other highlights beyond those of what I shared about how Vision Zero can benefit Safe Routes to School. And that really gives you an idea of things to ask for when you go to partner Safe Routes to School and Vision Zero together. And I really do strongly believe that Vision Zero staff should reach out to Safe Routes to School advocates and vice versa, because I think it will be the better for both movements if we're able to work together, hand in hand. And my contact information is on the screen if you have a question that we don't get to today. Thank you.
Okay, I think it's my turn. So hello everyone, this is Jonathan Rogers. I work at the District Department of Transportation, which is part of the local government here in Washington, D.C. And I want to thank everyone who spoke before me, Michelle, Margot, and Leah. They really did a great job of summarizing what I want to convey is that, you know, Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School really are very synergistic, and I think when we were starting our Vision Zero work about 2 years ago, you know, we we sort of understood the concept pretty well for beginners, but when it came to operationalizing what we were actually going to do and developing strategies for an action plan, established programs like Safe Routes to School were actually very helpful for us working on Vision Zero, because they already knew what they wanted to do in sort of concrete terms. So it's very helpful for both sides. People on Vision Zero looking to figure out what Vision Zero is really going to look like on the ground, and then, as you've heard, kind of elevating the good work that's already probably going on within your jurisdiction on Safe Routes to School. So like I said, Vision Zero is it's definitely newer than Safe Routes to School in the district. We are in our second year of implementing our action plan. In 2015, we started developing it, and then 2016 was our first year of implementing. This year is our second. But what the bottom line of all that really is, what it looks like in DC right now, is getting from fairly high numbers of serious injuries and fatalities down to zero by the year 2024. That was sort of, another big piece of the change with Vision Zero, is that sense of urgency and the specificity around safety data. Setting a baseline, getting, information on where our crashes, injuries, and fatalities are happening, who they're happening to, but really defining the problem of, we're at 28 fatalities as of last year, and we have less than 10 years to meet our goal of zero. We have that target of zero, and that year we want to hit it very specifically and very publicly established. So that's kind of the extra momentum we're trying to put behind transportation safety through Vision Zero. And if you notice in our graph, the last couple years, fatalities are actually creeping upward, which is in line with the national trend. So all the more urgency to pursue this important goal. So you heard a lot about the ease of both Safe Routes and Vision Zero, and I'll echo Leah here in saying I think all those E's are very important in supporting maybe the most important one, especially from DDOT's perspective, who manages public space here in the district, is the engineering and that safe street design, really building a safe system. And so you can see in this photo an example of some great features like a raised crosswalk or the zigzag pavement markings that we did at a school site, most likely by request and probably through Safe Routes to School, working kind of in a one-off way with that school. And so that's really good, and treatments like this are effective. But my sort of example of how Vision Zero is trying to improve upon that, in this image, you see another site located near an elementary school, but here we're sort of implementing the philosophy of we've identified a dangerous characteristic in what used to be an uncontrolled crosswalk. So the crosswalk, you can see, was painted always, but there was no stop sign at this intersection or traffic signal. And so here we sort of identified, and it's even more pronounced on multi-lane roads. This is probably a somewhat local street with only one lane in each direction, but that those unmarked crosswalks, especially for children, can pose some risk. And so the treatment we used here was the rectangular rapid flashing beacon. If you're not familiar, it's a pedestrian actuated device where a person crossing the street pushes the button, and then these very bright LED lights start flashing. And so the concept through Vision Zero would be wherever you find that characteristic, try to apply this fix throughout the whole system, sort of less of this location requested it, or this was part of this one school's Safe Routes plan for the year. And so that's, it's expensive to install things like this, and it might not be the right treatment for every location, but that's sort of the evolution we're trying to do, is really identify dangerous characteristics and fix them system-wide. We do similar work with hawk signals is another good example, and that's actually usually in the middle of a block and often on those multi-lane streets where we want basically a traffic signal where a hawk signal can, again, is initiated by the pedestrian, and it actually ends up being a red light and forcing drivers to come to a complete stop. To support these kinds of things, and I think another benefit Vision Zero can help add to a Safe Routes to School approach, there's sort of things at the legislative and regulatory level that certainly Safe Routes to School as a program on its own might not have access to or the ability to change. And again, as you heard from others, and in DC it's the case that Vision Zero is really a mayoral priority. So it's at that high level of executive leadership, and it's really there's consensus throughout our government, among the city council as well, our legislative branch, around transportation safety. And so some things that we might not be able to address as a transportation agency without regulatory changes or legislative changes are happening through Vision Zero, but they're very much in line with what Safe Routes to School probably always wanted or would have recommended anyway. And an example of that is a rulemaking that is still in process here in DC, but it's its second proposed rule, so it's gone through public comment and things like that, but not yet taken effect. We're basically taking the school zone idea and sort of extending it to other locations that have similar characteristics, again, so trying to address the whole system. So places like playgrounds, recreation centers, pools, athletic fields, and even senior centers where we know, quote-unquote vulnerable users are more likely to be. Unless the speed limit is signed otherwise, we want something like a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit in those locations as well. So basically a school zone without a school. And so that's something that, again, I think someone working on Safe Routes to School within our agency may not have had sort of the access to the higher levels of government to propose things like that. So Vision Zero can help there. As also you heard alluded to earlier, another cool program that kind of came out of Safe Routes and our school systems work and DDOT is our universal bicycle education program, which we call Biking in the Park. Every single second grader in a DC public school participates in this program now. Last year was the first year. DDOT's role in it was kind of, in addition to general support, we purchased the bicycles, balance bikes, and then these small sort of like BMX-style bikes that every single kid, as part of their physical education class in second grade, goes through a bicycle education program now. As part of our recent council legislation, that's actually going to be expanded into general transportation safety education. So we're working on what that curriculum will look like. So it'll, in addition to the bicycle piece, there will also be, pieces on being able to walk safely and sort of understanding all the rules of the road as kids would interact with it. So last year, as you can see, we served over 4,000 students at 78 schools, and the classes culminate in that image you see is actual a bike ride outside of the gymnasium, actually on streets, hopefully on nice, safe bike facilities, and they try to go to a destination like a park or something desirable if one is nearby. A cool part, again, that Vision Zero has added to this is with Vision Zero we have a grant program, and as was mentioned, no new money, so to speak, is involved in that. It's money that was just used for something else. It comes from our automated traffic enforcement program, our speed and red light cameras. $500,000 of that each year is dedicated toward a grant program that Vision Zero uses to either help community organizations or partner DC government agencies to pursue a strategy in our Vision Zero action plan. And so this example actually tied into the Biking in the Park program, a nonprofit called Gearing Up Bicycles, which does bicycle repair, but is basically a youth development organization, and they train youth bike mechanics. They earned a grant last year to do these pop-up bicycle shops, which they scheduled to coincide with those culminating rides of the Biking in the Park program. And so they focused east of the Anacostia River in DC, which are more low income and communities of color sections of the city, where there actually isn't a bicycle shop anywhere on that side of the city. So if you own a bicycle, you really don't have access to the tools or expertise to ensure it's safe. That's what these pop-up bike shops are all about. So they're really great. They serve lots and lots of children that are in the program, but also just community members who show up, and they tell us that people show up with a frame of a bicycle and not much else, and they leave with a safely operating bike, and it's all for free for the residents. So kind of another thing that our Vision Zero program is adding to our existing activities. A few other bits and pieces. When we were planning our Vision Zero plan, we really wanted the youth perspective. And these are probably things that our Safe Routes partners already knew, but again, we brought that in. We had a Vision Zero Youth Summit where we had 150 youth in our summer youth employment program, and so those are older kids probably than are usually served in Safe Routes. More older middle school and high school kids, and we did engineering exercises and sort of charrettes with them. They contributed education ideas for safety campaigns. And they actually shared a lot with our engineers about sort of looking at mock-up street designs and actually real plans for locations we're redesigning, and sharing sort of some concerns that really weren't top of the mind for engineers, like personal security and safety and those kinds of issues, where they were concerned about things like barriers preventing them from escaping an unsafe situation, like in a personal way, not from a traffic safety perspective. So really gave our engineers kind of a new perspective on what youth might be dealing with in locations that they're redesigning for traffic safety. You've probably seen events like this, Bike to School Day or Walk to School Day. Again, I think this is just another example of something Vision Zero was able to shine a brighter spotlight on, but had been going on for a while. So our mayor supports this and shows up. They're really great events, and I think are just getting extra attention now that Vision Zero is a part of them. Likewise, an agency like our state superintendent of education has a whole transportation department. It's small buses that take kids with special needs to school, so it's not walking or biking to school, but it's still a big piece of education and transportation safety that I think was really left out of conversations in the past. And in DC, this agency for us in 1 year serves about 3,300 kids with about 850 buses. They travel 34,000 miles a day. And so this is just an example of this Driver of the Year award program they do that we, again, have highlighted with Vision Zero, but just really wasn't brought into the whole conversation the way it is now. Again, we have cool little events like Slow Down DC that the mayor does on the first day of school, and we're able to weave that into Vision Zero and Safe Routes to School, and again, just all this synergy and more attention, more high-level presence with sort of a low-hanging fruit and sort of common campaign you might do. As Leah mentioned, data is hugely important for Vision Zero, and it's been that much more helpful for Safe Routes to School. We now, as a result of Vision Zero, publish every single crash that happens in the district within 24 hours. We put it in our open data portal so that you can download it in a spreadsheet, or you can map it with GIS. We had a crowdsourcing tool that you can see on the screen where parents were actually able to identify us of dangerous locations so that we could look at those. And the way it's helped Safe Routes to School is that parents and teachers are actually armed with more information when they're applying to Safe Routes, or where they're just worried about a specific location. They can really define the problem and prove to us with data that there's a serious safety concern. So that's been very helpful. And then just lastly, I want to talk about that coordination. I think we're fortunate in DC that our DOT is basically a state and a city DOT combined. And within DC government, although there are a lot of moving pieces, we have sort of everything under one roof. So we have our mayor who's in control of the schools and the chancellor that the mayor appoints. We have a deputy mayor for education. That office of the state superintendent that I mentioned is also a DC agency. We have a charter school board and then DCPS, the traditional public schools. But all of that is really under one roof. And so just bringing all those folks together for Vision Zero resulted in sort of things you may have assumed were already going on, like our deputy mayor's office asked us, hey, can we get a map of the crashes and all the school sites? And we were like, of course. No one ever asked us for that, and they never realized they could get that. So it was kind of an easy win that just bringing people together all in one room, it was very obvious that we needed those things and could provide them, where before people kind of assumed it wasn't possible. So I think I will leave it there. Contact information is here if anyone has any other questions. Thank you.
Great, thank you everyone. Great presentations. We've had a number of questions come in, so we'll try to get through as many as we can in the next few minutes. We did have a number of questions related to either graphics or maps or citations for different statistics that people showed in the presentations. I wanted to let you know that a lot of that information, a lot of the graphics can be found on either the Vision Zero Network website or on the Safe Routes to School National Partnership website. And we'll have our contact information with the recording, so that way if you see something, if you saw something in the recording and want to figure out where that is online, please feel free to send us an email. So first couple questions I'm going to direct to Leah. First one, have you seen that Vision Zero is usually implemented only in cities? What about counties? And if it does happen in counties, how does it look different for counties?
Great question. The movement in the U.S. has started more in big cities. I think there's just been a little bit more, frankly, political appetite and willingness there. But it's definitely going now and is expanding now to, I'd say, smaller, maybe more like middle-sized cities, a few smaller, and also to regions. I'm glad you mentioned that. There are now a few MPOs or metropolitan planning organizations that are adopting Vision Zero. And I think that does look a little bit different, obviously, or in many cases, MPOs don't necessarily say design the streets or oversee it, but they do oversee funding decisions and policy decisions. So that's really powerful. I'll emphasize too that when Vision Zero started in Sweden 20 years ago, it actually started more in the rural areas. So there definitely is a model. It's really based on the same principles as what we talked about here with Vision Zero. Obviously, different land use and such between urban and rural is different, but it's absolutely possible, and I do expect to see Vision Zero growing in more diverse types of locations.
And this is Margot. I'll just add briefly, Leah, is Montgomery County, Maryland is actually in the process of finalizing their Vision Zero plan, so there will be a county model soon.
Great. Sort of a related question. We have a question related to towards zero deaths and versus Vision Zero, and is there any substantive difference between the two? And people have heard both terms, so what's the difference? And if so, how can they be bridged?
Yeah, this is Leah. I'm happy to share. About 40, I think more than 40 states have some sort of zero idea on the books. Most of them call it towards zero deaths or some sort of zero idea in their state highway safety plan. Some, frankly, are stronger than others. A lot of times it's pretty loose language, and I don't mean to be critical there, but what we see, I think, that's very different with the Vision Zero approach at the local level. What we're seeing is that with Vision Zero, communities are getting much more detailed. They really are creating explicit action plans with explicit timelines. For instance, most cities are committing to the goal of zero within 10 years, sometimes 15 years. But there's a clear timeline, which means there's much more accountability, there's much more urgency. They really need to lay out explicit actions, which then, again, can be policy makers and leaders can be held accountable for. I think that's a big difference, whereas the traditional towards zero deaths approach, which again has been rolling in states for quite a while and is a good thing, but it's a softer approach. There's not as much urgency and political commitment there. Doesn't mean it's not possible. There's no reason these things don't support each other, but we'd certainly like to see more of that commitment and action and urgency at the state level. And I think we're starting to see more interest in that.
Thank you. Quite a few questions have come in for Jonathan, some specifics about the work in DC. So I'm going to try to lump these all together. In terms of the bike education program, it's unusual to see second graders chosen for bike education. Was there any reason behind that?
That's a great question. So I'm actually not the expert on that particular program, and I don't know how they arrived at that age group. If you want to Google it, it's part of the Cornerstones initiative at DC Public Schools. And so I don't know if that broader initiative works with kids at that age, but that's where we started. I think they do reach down a little younger as well, because I know they start with balance bikes on kids even younger, I think, and they work their way up to the bikes with actual pedals. But yeah, I do not know the logic behind the second grade.
We are seeing that in a few other places across the country, so guessing there's information behind that out there. People are interested. In terms of, in DC, in terms of staffing working on Vision Zero, I think people would like to get a sense of how much agency staff goes into managing Vision Zero and getting the efforts out the door.
That one's interesting too. I think we've done it in DC again without like we didn't have to hire a new full-time person just to work on it. I work in our policy branch within the director's office in our DOT, so I've been serving sort of as the project manager. And then I think it's the challenging part of it is that when we started planning, we brought together 30 DC government agencies, and we we're encouraging them to explore what their role could be in transportation safety. And so they were asking the same questions, like, is this new work that we aren't going to have the resources to be able to do? But I think most of them were able to sort of just reprioritize and add a small bits of work to programs that already existed to really just accelerate what they could do in transportation safety, or found things that they could do, really low-hanging fruit that no one ever asked them to do before. For example, we had these safety videos at DDOT that were all prepared and weren't getting a lot of visibility, and our DMV started showing them in their waiting rooms on the TV screens there. They were like, nobody ever asked us to do that. We could definitely do that and reach all these drivers. Or our taxi cab commission started putting little window stickers that New York uses, and we stole from them about not dooring bicyclists and pedestrians. So it's not that you need a whole lot of staff. We did hire consultants to help us develop the action plan, and depending on your data analysis ability, that was really the big lift in the beginning. Was we had a lot of traffic crash records, but they weren't geocoded, so you wouldn't be able to do those nice heat maps and things of all your crashes. So we worked with an academic partner to get all those crashes geocoded, and then from there, it really didn't require a whole lot of extra staff or money.
Great, thank you for that information. A little bit related, and I'll open this up to any of the presenters. Ideas for funding Vision Zero. Are there grants? Are there other funding sources? I know Jonathan touched a little bit upon that in his presentation. What are the other ways that Vision Zero is getting funded?
Yeah, this is Leah. I'll mention that most of the communities we've worked with in the last 3 years have not waited for new funding to start on Vision Zero. I think that's important. As much as we emphasize the importance of funding, if we wait till we have everything in hand, we're going to be waiting a long time, obviously. So I would say there's a bit of a chicken egg thing here, but what we're seeing is that when you build the commitment to Vision Zero and really build political and community support in a really broad range, then you build more support for more funding. So what we're seeing in communities like LA, Seattle, Austin, San Francisco, all 4 of those cities just in the last 2 years passed local measures, funding measures, either taxes, sales tax, or bond measures or levies that brought in significant new funding for transportation with a real focus on safety. Some of them with a youth and schools related focus as well. But these are cases where you built out the engagement in Vision Zero, then you went and said, okay, now help us fund it. So sure, if you have new funding, great, absolutely, use it. But I would say don't wait. The other thing is, there's a lot of funding out there today that sometimes goes to less than ideal purposes, I would say, in the transportation system. Roadway widenings and things that actually, make cars move faster and degrade safety. So really what we're also thinking about is how do we reprioritize the funding that exists? And again, that really gets back to that data and understanding where problems are happening and where money's being spent. And I'll say Vision Zero has been really powerful in helping bring more funding to communities that may be not only traditionally underserved, as we talked about in a couple presentations, but also where they may not have, let's say, the political clout or the flexibility in, say, work schedules to go to City Hall at a meeting on a Tuesday at 2 p.m. and lobby for more funding for safety for sidewalks. Or maybe there's 10 other really pressing issues like gun violence or other important things, access to healthy food, et cetera, that are more top of mind right now. What the data from Vision Zero then helps do is say, hey, even if we don't have a crowd of people down here chanting about adding sidewalks in this neighborhood, the data is showing we need that safety improvement. So again, it's about reallocating funding that already exists just as much as new funding.
Great. Thank you, Leah. Unfortunately, we are out of time, so thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you to all of our presenters. Again, the recording of this webinar will be up on our website within a couple of days, and we'll also be sending out a post-webinar survey. Please take our survey. It helps us to get your feedback and make our future webinars even better. Thanks again. Have a nice day.